I'd triple down on marketing. As you look back, maybe we were all in the early days, I'm not going to take that ad out, or I'm not going to do this. It's all about keeping that up there. So I think you got to look at those times, and I never say go into debt to go out there to put it out there, but you got to realize now's the time people are looking for you.
Hey guys, Damien Stevens, host of MSP Mindset, founder and CEO of Servosity. Today, I continue my mission to interview 100 of the fastest growing and most interesting MSPs on the planet. I am blessed to be joined by Michael Goldstein. Now, have you ever wondered, why am I not growing? Am I spending enough on marketing as an MSP? Michael detailed why, coming out of the pandemic, he didn't need just to do a little more. He needed to triple his spend more time in the community to give back and show up and give value first without expecting something in return. If you want a real world perspective on what it takes to grow your MSP and what it looks like to really invest in marketing, don't miss out on my conversation with Michael today. So Michael, tell me about getting started, and particularly, if you don't mind, the life of a VAR and kind of feeling burnt out. Like tell me that story that unfortunately too many of us can understand or relate to, perhaps.
You know what? It's the life of, you're that last call. You know that the buck stops with you, and that's where the customer feels. So, whether you're that engineer or that project manager, I know as the business owner, I feel it. I'm glued to my phone. I'm glued to sitting out there hoping that, in the morning I wake up, there's no extra text that comes in. But I think that the other side of that is you gotta, years ago, Dunkin' Donuts used to have this one guy that would come out, big jolly looking guy, gotta make the donuts. And I always tell people, IT's not like that. You walk into Dunkin' Donuts and they're out of chocolate frosted. They're like, hey, pick one of the others. The buck stops with us, and I think that we have to love our job. We got to get up every day because something's going to break, something's going to catch fire, or we're going to read about a new merger, or we're going to see some new tech that kind of excites us.
Yeah, or some new tech or cybersecurity that doesn't excite us.
Hey, listen, who would think, that, the Chinese are in U.S. telecom.
Right.
Or what was it? The federal government had a breach over Christmas,
Right. It's crazy.
It's a crazy world we're in.
So how did you go from being a VAR to MSP? What drove that?
I think it was just overall, I think as tech changed, we used to be, hey, how many boxes can I get you today? Do you need me to hook them up? Go through that. But I think, the advent of, fast internet and everything along those lines, how could you, I guess when I was growing up, we weren't required to wear safety belts. You go out there and now it's like, oh my God, I don't have it on. And I think that, that VAR to MSP is that same knowledge, knowing that we can have some tools that will alert us, that will make us smarter. And I think that really comes in. And I think with everything, there's a double-edged sword. The internet made it great for us to be able to be on top of things. But then shopping comes on, and now the clients have the ability to go out there and shop and find things. So I've always said that, at the end of the year, I always look at it and what am I going to do things better next year? Because tech changes, but we're almost a commodity. At some point. You go out there. I just recently went out and helped my son buy a new car. When you pick that brand, you go out there and now I'm on their website. I have the VIN number. I have the sticker that's there. So we have to make ourselves more valuable to our customers. And I think that's just, that tradition now of keeping up your MSP.
So somebody that's seen that whole VAR to MSP transition, how are you approaching staying valuable to your clients?
I realize that most people, I'll say, or most customers like to do business with people they like. So in reality, I feel like I don't want to, every time I got to buy a piece of furniture, you walk in that store and you're like, oh man, everybody's looking at me. Who's the first guy to come running? And I want my customers to feel like I'm calling them to say hello, talking about, my favorite hockey team, talking about, just new tech, not like, oh no, I see Mike's caller ID. What's he trying to sell me? And I think it is an ongoing relationship that I think that we have to keep up with the customers. And that's the biggest piece, because before it's like, oh, it's that time of year. Let me get the purchase order signed. How many do you want? Where does it have to be? And now there's a science to it, right? I think we all look at it. I think my grandfather probably passed away, oh God, it's probably 8, 9, maybe even 10 years ago. And he used to always ask me, what do you do? I don't understand this stuff. And the only way I could break it down into anything, and it stuck with me, is I'm a computer chef. I take those recipes and I make this final product. And that recipe works. And that recipe, 80% of it is service, right? We're not. Yeah. And also in the old days when we were VARs, I'd buy a server. It would come in 100 pieces. I'd have to build it. I'd have to put it all together. I go out there. Now you're buying sophisticated equipment that's fully configured, fully hardware configured. And now all I really have to do is build the software and get it in there. So I think it's that right recipe that we're all trying to do the same thing, but it's the service that makes the difference, and that it's that buying experience.
Hey guys, Damien here. As I continue to interview the top MSPs in the world, one thing has become incredibly clear. It's time that we let go. Even more than that, every time I focus on my zone of genius and get out of the way and do the very few things I'm good at and delegate to others, I'm ready for that next level of growth. So if you're ready for that next level of growth, one way that I could help you is with Servosity. We co-manage your backups and disaster recovery so you can focus on what you do best, let us do the rest, and then what we do is we test the backups every single day so you never have to worry. If you'd like to learn more, click the link below. So I want to kind of double click on that, the service. I feel like sometimes in this day and age, as a MSP and a tech guy, I can get wrapped around the axle of like, look at all this shiny tech you're talking about. We got to keep up with it. But I mean, it's about service, right? So tell me how you focus and make it about service.
Because I think that, they're buying on price, right? And we all know that bundle is never the same. So we have to get past that. And in reality, it's making sure that the customers get the right response, that they feel like they understand. I don't need them to understand the bits, the bytes of why, but they want some information and they want to be transparent. And, we're also one of those companies that when they take us on as a managed service provider, if they're a larger company, they already have those relationships for the widgets. So I don't have to sell them everything. And when I don't have to sell them everything, they feel a little comforted. For the smaller customers, they do like the idea that I sell everything, but we really do try to make sure that we're price competitive. I wouldn't want someone to look on, online and find that same desktop that I'm selling them for $3,000. That's a $1,000 unit that's out there. And I also think it's transparency in what you're billing them and what they're getting. So for us, we have a basic bundle that goes out, but everything else is line itemed. Your email security, all those little pieces. Some people don't like it, but I say, listen, at least you know what you're getting. If I gave you Mike's bundle and you're out golfing with your buddy and you're a law firm, what are you going to say? Oh, I got Mike's email security. I got Mike's desktop. So I think it's important for the transparency that they know that. And also that transition to the MSP, I want them to know that, hey, we are an authorized, Dell partner. It's not just going up on Amazon and buying it from anybody that's putting out there. So we want them to know that whatever we sell, we're fully behind, we're fully certified, and that if they ask me for something, like there's a few things we don't do. We don't do a lot of end user training. We don't do wiring, but I bring in a partner that will do that. And I tell them, listen, you ask them all you want. I don't take any referral fees or any commissions from those third-party partners. I want them to bring me business. So if you're unhappy with them, tell them what they can do and I'll find you someone else. Or you could bring someone in, but give me the same courtesy to interview them to make sure that if they're doing wiring, are they certified? Do they know what they're doing? Do they have insurance? So the transparency in the relationship, I think, is the most important thing of the customer service. And we are upfront because we do tell them, listen, we're going to have some bad days.
Hmm.
I'm in South Florida. If it rains, we all forget how to drive. I-95 is always crowded. Stuff
Yeah.
happens. There's an accident. I think it's important to make sure that you let them know. You can't tell them at 9:15 when you were supposed to be there at 8:30 that you're going to be late. In today's day and
Yeah.
age, tech kind of works against us or for us. And I think it's important that's really what we go out there. And that's why I say transparency and letting them know the level of service.
I love that. Transparency and level of service together. I'm curious, as you're kind of trying to set those expectations around when you'll be there or what you're going to do or how, what they're getting and what's included, how do you tie in, I guess, how do you work with the sales team? You have a sales team, you're growing that, but then relationships are also big. So do they need to have a relationship directly with you or with the account manager or salesperson? I'm curious where you are in that.
I want the account manager. I want the account manager to have that initial relationship that's out there. But listen, I want to come in, shake hands, and kind of let them know. I think sometimes it's good to use the title, and sometimes it's not good to use the title. But I think I would always feel happy when you're at a good restaurant. Here, I'm a Christmas Day baby. So the night before Christmas, my wife and I went out to Ruth Chris. That was my birthday dinner. Even though you're in that high-level restaurant, when the manager walks around and says, "Hey, how you doing?" And when he came up to my table, they brought a little confetti to put on the table, and he says, "We know it's your birthday." I was like, "That's kind of cool. Yeah, I'm dropping a big dollar for dinner, but here the guy took the time to come around." So that's what I do. I kind of relate a lot of stuff to food and cars, and if I came in and said thank you for doing business going out there, I think it's a good follow-up for everybody. Everybody wants to meet the guy up top.
Yeah. So I'm curious how you handle that on your journey, right? You mentioned you're kind of expanding your sales team. Not everybody even has a sales team, but you're expanding yours. And I think it's one thing to go from kind of owner-led selling where you are the relationship to where now the initial relationship starts maybe with the account manager or sales rep. So how do you have any formality or any process that you use to try to say, they need to stay in touch with them, or I need to build this relationship? Or
I think it's learning by doing, because they see, one of our big successes probably over the past 8-9 years is that we got involved in the community. And in the community, we're involved in 3 large chamber of commerces. 2 of them are actually on the board of directors, and I run some committees and councils for them. So when I bring them in and they're talking to people, most of the time they know who I am or one of my other. We have one dedicated person that we call community relations. And this guy lives and breathes, chambers, organizations that we're in. I'm telling you, it's breakfast, lunch, dinner, after. It's that kind of thing. We're involved there. So as they come in and find these prospects, they're usually in the community. And they probably don't have to do, "Hey, I work for LAN Infotech." They probably recognize who we are. They've heard our name before, and I think that's important. And then you just want to keep up the tradition. They'll be like, "Oh, yeah, that guy Glenn, he's everywhere," or "That guy Mike is everywhere." And I think that they get to see that, and they want to be part of that, and they like the feeling of that. We also do a lot of, in-community kind of things. We're at charitable events. Last year, we sponsored 2 beach cleanups where we show people that we're there to help for our causes that are out there and try to support our not-for-profit. So I think they want to be part of the team and keep that up. And I think that's really something that they learn from. So in the beginning, it's like, you teach your kid to drive. You're out there all the time in the car. So I think that I'm out there with them. They hear the pitch, they go through this, and they take it on from that. And I think it's important to see that. And they also do know that I say to the clients, very big sports fan, very big Miami Heat, Florida Panthers fan. And I always joke to them, "Listen, if you got a problem and the Heat or Panthers are playing up to an hour past game time, here's my cell phone. You can text me." Lots of times I have these chats back and forth with customers. It's like, "Oh my God, did you see that goal?" Sometimes my wife's like, "Who are you texting?" I go, "I got this huge, group of people that are fans like me." So I think they feel a little touch on that. And then the salespeople feel like they want that kind of relationship.
Hmm.
Like I said, I'm just not selling. If we're a big sponsor of the Florida Panthers Hockey Club, so if I'm at a game with you, we won't talk any business. We run a couple of sweet nights that I bring people out there. There's no business. It's usually my grandkids running around. And I want people to see the other side of us. And then I
Mm.
know that the people that we hire want to be part of that.
Mm. Yeah. I think that's really interesting that not everybody does anymore. I think that used to be the common thing and is less. And I'm also kind of curious, and it may have been some time, but tell me how you transitioned from culture and also being so entrenched with community from New York City to Florida.
So I am down in Florida. It's probably 28 years now. And I've been this year for LAN Infotech, it'll be our 16th year.
Okay.
Prior to that, I was with a startup, VAR, I'll call them, out on Long Island. We started off with 3 employees and we worked our way to like 50 plus in 3 different cities. So I kind of grew up in the VAR MSP world. But when I moved down to Florida, I realized, and when I started LAN Infotech, that my clients aren't getting any younger. And
Mm-hmm.
if you go back 16 years, we were at the advent of social media, and that buying model was a little different. And I always wanted to change with that time and see that. I did a something with ScalePad on one of their MSP pieces last year, and the guy's like, Mike, how do you get 30,000 LinkedIn followers? And it's like, I started a long time ago. I think that we have to look at our ever-changing market of that and flow with it. So my 2 older boys work for me. One of them's 37, the other one's 34. And as they came on board, I would, big sports fan. I'd hang out with their friends. And as their friends got older and their friends came into friends, we socialize around sports, and it's interesting to see what their mindset is. And if we can't change our business models to that new mindset, then we're just old dinosaurs to come out there.
Mm.
So I think it's important that we look at the trends and changes over time, and that's what I've done over time. And I think that I felt like I wanted to be more connected with my employees because as I started up, and about 9 years ago, I got an opportunity to join the Greater Fort Lauderdale Chamber. And I wasn't really a chamber person. You go to these events, you feel a little out of place. And, I had a very good mentor. And right away on day one, they're like, hey, listen, we need someone to run our technology council. And by the way, you'll be on the board of directors. Now, I was like, all right. And there was no manual, there was no anything. And I realized the power of, somebody just goes out and there's one road that's going to go into construction for the next 3 months. And what that does to the businesses or our trek. Or, down in South Florida, dredging the port to make it. There's a lot of things that affected our business, and I was like mesmerized as to that. And I realized inside that world, you can't just write your check and expect the business to come. You got to be out there. And then I learned that, at least for me, as I ran a council, and you run a tech council, you look at the chambers, you get the ISPs that come in, you get the mobile salespeople, and everybody wants to sell. But I was like, guys, when you're sitting at this table, you got to take your sales hat off, and we're here for the chamber. That's why we're volunteering. And that should lead to business. And that's what taught me a lot. Also, we grew up kind of in the legal space, and we do a lot of legal work. And every year around the Christmas time, what would happen is, I get all these notices from all my clients, and they were involved in not-for-profits. And, tied to that same thing, I realized that as we started working with Microsoft, we can do things to help the not-for-profits go out there and grant them, licenses. We actually did a grant search program. We figured if we can give back, that would work out great. But we do something good for them, but their board of directors was pretty much my customers. So we were doing a good thing for the community, a good thing for the not-for-profit, and the customers would see that. So we had that sense of need, and just the smile on their face. We did work with some homeless shelters, really trying time to see that. And then we recently, down in South Florida, we call it, it's that blue wave of trying to go out there and, save the ocean, save the beach, save the resources. And we got involved with a community called the Octopus Foundation, and didn't realize, all the stuff that they go out and do. So we got involved in some beach cleanups, and it wasn't just, hey, give up your Saturday, come down and clean the beach. These guys put together a program where you show up in the morning. We had beach yoga, we had beach exercise, and then we did cleanup. And it was all kind of fun, and there was a lot of sponsors and things. We did a turtle release last year through the Octopus Foundation where we got to, bring a select few of clients to Nova South University where they have an aquatic foundation. They showed us the history of why they do this for this turtle release. And, it's 9 o'clock at night. We're all like little children in the dark waiting for the little turtles to be re-released back into the ocean. So it was just kind of cool. And to see the customers and see other people, we were all there for the same thing. And, it was just very cool to be able to help out. And that really, and I share that. I share that back with our employees. And I do fight the battle of lots of times, I'm really here to help you. I don't need the press. But if you insist, I'll take it. It's not about having your name in their newsletter or something like that. If you can make a change and help out, it really changes. It changes the way you look at life.
Yeah. Giving first, right?
Giving first and helping them out. We have churches, we have synagogues, we have a mosque, we have, you name it, in that. And people, I didn't realize till I started working in this space that a lot of these golf tournaments are not-for-profits. We had a big one, the Honda Classic down here. It's a big, giant not-for-profit. Not-for-profits go up, 501(c), but not-for-profits file with those golf tournaments for grants. And a lot of those monies go. I didn't realize that. You hear about things that aren't the typical commercial stuff that you see. You didn't know about this. So wherever you can help out, and you go out there, and I think it's great.
Is not-for-profit a vertical you focus on?
It's one of them that's there, and I think it's one of those that have a big need. Because sometimes if it's a religious organization, I'll use that as an example, it's a congregant that's trying to do stuff, in reality, they're taking money, they have to protect themselves just like you and me. Some of them aren't that sophisticated. Some of them are, just a little startup working out of a storefront, a garage sometimes. And you just want to make sure that, they're cyber protected up front, that they're not using, an AOL account.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting to me. So that's why one of the verticals you've gotten involved in getting grants for technology in some cases.
It was interesting because what we found is that we partnered up with a not-for-profit that was helping other not-for-profits. And they introduced us to this grant database. And really what we did is we put equipment in their library because it used to be IP address lockdown. And we did all these events for the not-for-profit, but they gave us access to do searches. So we had a grant program, and we told people, you will only get one email from us. You will get that email saying that we've gotten your stuff or we haven't been able to find a grant. And, we weren't selling their address, and it was a great piece for us. And we found a bunch of different types of grants that were out there. It wasn't only just technology. Microsoft had a great program, and still does, for us to be able to grant them. Because, yes, they can go online, they can get these free licenses, but if they're not tech, what do they know what to do with it? Mm-hmm. We discounted our services, we helped find these grants, and it just got us started in the door of people not trying to do it themselves. And I'm always a believer that you can only get good service if you pay for it. So if you have someone that's working elsewhere, and, God forbid the network goes down, who's going to service it? So that's where we started realizing that we had a niche, that we can help them out. And those not-for-profits, I think at our chamber one time, they didn't tell me, they invited me a couple times. We do this not-for-profit, they call it social impact breakfast. Actually, Wednesday morning, I'm on a panel to talk about AI. But I used to go to these things, and one time they invited me. They didn't invite me to speak, and they honored me. I was like so embarrassed that they talked about all these people came up with what we did for them, and I was like, I had a tear in my eye, on that kind of thing. And that kind of give back, realized that you got a lot more work to do.
Yeah, no doubt. How did you end up helping when the pandemic and things hit?
Man, that was, I guess, for all of us. I was just reminiscing with a friend on Saturday, and we were talking about it. So we had done work. So one of our other, forwardly thinking organizations was, in every county probably everywhere in the United States has a bar association, for the lawyers. And we had started probably a couple months before with the bar association, even before we could spell pandemic, where they would start doing these continuing legal education credits. And they're like, hey, you know what we'll do is we'll film it. So they had built their conference, I won't say their conference, their event center to have cameras. And it must have been a week before that where we just did a cybersecurity one. And we're like, oh my God, pandemic hits, one day, everyone's in the office, and next day, you got 1,000 remote people.
Yeah.
And, we did those first month of getting everybody up and running remote. And, next thing it's like, oh, what are we going to do? Microsoft started pushing out Teams. People could barely spell Zoom. So what we started to do is we would assist our customers, but we got super involved with those remote products. And we realized that people needed training on it. So we started offering, no charge remote training we did it for teachers, because in our school system, you figure out that these teachers were barely using this technology, and next they're relying on it. So we would do a lot of Teams training. We did some Zoom training. And then for our not-for-profits, as we got a little deeper into the pandemic, we actually helped them do virtual fundraising. And we did virtual events. We found a really cool interactive platform that was different than a Zoom. And we would do these virtual planning events for them. And then eventually, people were coming back, and, we charged for our services. And it was just a crazy kind of thing. We were doing, synagogues. We were doing not-for-profit gala events. We did something for an organization called Gilda's Club, where they had, a couple big Saturday Night Live guys that were on virtually helping raise money. And it was like a really cool kind of event.
Wow.
We kind of helped out where we could. And I would be doing these weekly or bi-weekly, Microsoft Teams hands-on trainings, because every other week, Microsoft would have a new great update. And it was kind of cool. Help out the community. And in some instances, we charged for the trainings where people need some on-depth things.
Tell me about the challenges you faced in building this business to, is it 22 as of today now, people?
So, listen, it's always hard going from 5 to 10. And then I think the biggest struggle was getting over that 20 hump. It's a big number to absorb salary-wise. I always say that everyone works for me. It's hard to count on outsource. And in our area, we're still rolling trucks. There's no way to say it. People buy, someone buys a new computer. We're selling that business. I don't want them to go to the marketplace to get all that stuff. So we're out there doing those kind of things. So most people aren't doing that. We didn't see that. We saw a lot of people were doing mostly remote. And then, you had the challenges, post pandemic, people were looking how they were going to save a buck. They went to a lot of those, hey, I can do this for $20 a month. You don't know what country you're in. You don't know what the response time is. So it was always tough looking at that. A couple times you're worrying, how you're going to make that next payroll. So, we were out there trying to build a reputation. And, sometimes it wasn't what the initial monthly recurring revenue was going to be. We know that there was a bigger picture. Like you'd walk into someone, running old equipment, that they have to get this equipment up there. So some of it was a gamble. Worst part is those non-paying customers, right? You go through that. You're like, really? But I think that, you win some, you lose some. I try to be a good community partner. If I'm taking someone's customer, it's not like I knew that you were doing it. They were looking for a reason. And I always sit there and say, they don't make that call unless they know they're already done with the person that's there. So if I lost the customer, I'm happy to turn over the information. And in some instances, we didn't get that same reciprocal piece. So it's always hard. I'm very involved in, MSP events. I'm part of, do a lot of work with the channel company. You and I met at an MSP event that are there. I think it's good to hear what other people are doing. And if you have something to offer, I like to participate and give to that. Right post-pandemic, PAX 8 and VoIP, they started bringing this. It was the first time that they had this trailer that would go around. I mean, this whole road show that they would bring to outdoor areas. To first of all, you'd name a charity. You'd ask everybody to come, and they'd bring this great camper that was out there. They'd set all these things up, but it was all, you'd have to invite your competitors.
Mm-hmm.
And I had, a huge turnout of people I hadn't seen in a while. It was just literally, if you walked into our building to go to the bathroom, you weren't a mask. It was still it was just after those COVID days. So I felt like it was really kind of cool seeing everybody again. It's not like we don't know it. And as I, started LAN Infotech, we're lucky enough in Fort Lauderdale to have a Microsoft Office. We got to know our competitors. We understood that you had to be a good community player and go out there. So I think those are those challenges. It's hard to lose a customer, but you can't be emotionally connected to it. By the time they called you, they already knew that they were leaving.
Yeah. Speaking of which, I know a lot of folks say this is just, crowded. You mentioned you got to price things well. Like, how do you differentiate in a crowded market?
I still say it all comes back to services. I go out there, I give them references. We are a heavily awarded company. We have a lot of local awards that are by vote. We have a bunch of awards that we have to submit financials to get. So usually I say that costs to go out there. So we have a good track record. So the double-edged sword of being out there in the community, or going out in vertical organizations, is it just takes a couple of bad reviews, right? Nobody wants to be that first customer after that restaurant opens up after the bad review. Right. I think that you have to try to make sure that you do things right. I think that's the important thing. And listen, we're in an industry where you can get someone that'll give it to you for $1. Someone might be giving you for $4,000. So I think that you have to appreciate what you get. And I always say everything looks good when it's new. What does that warranty look like? Is someone going to return your call? And for us, we always have those fire drills. We're in, that hurricane zone. The hurricanes have gotten bigger. We pride ourselves that we do a lot of prep for that with our customers. We'll let them know who, what, where. I will say that, in my house, I got, multiple internet connections that are out there, including, MiFi and all those kind of things. And like, who answers the phone after? What's those pieces? I mean, in old days, I remember moving a client down. We had a client in a 15-story building on the top floor. We had to carry all their equipment out to a colo. So I think it's important to keep that relationship up with your customers. Testimonials. Listen, no one's going to give you a bad testimonial, but you talk to people. Some of our people are really, overly emphasizing, how good we are. And I think we have those. So I usually, that's my price. I'm not going to sit there and, not like the lower car industry where you walk in and you think you're, dropping 21 grand, but in the end, I didn't tell you it's really 32. The price is here. That's what we provide. These are the pieces that are out there. And it's hard for us in the IT industry for people to compare apples to apples, because we all have our own recipe.
Yeah.
If I sell you a Dell laptop and it's $1,100 and you happen to see the, Thanksgiving Day, Black Friday special for $300, we all know there's a big difference in that. And I think that's why you have to sell value and sell relationship.
Well said. Looking back over the years you've been building this business, are there any, with hindsight, maybe particular walls that you hit that you go, at this size it was this issue, or at this size it was this issue?
I think it's always marketing. I will say that when you ask, what changed in COVID, I will say that when we got partially through that, I'd tripled down on marketing. So I think that, as you look back, maybe we were all in the early days, I'm not going to take that ad out, or I'm not going to do this. It's all about keeping that up there. So I think you got to look at those times, and I never say go into debt to go out there to put it out there, but you got to realize now's the time people are looking for you. And those are the times where maybe I skimped when I was a smaller company, not realizing that, what the return is. In hindsight, always got to at least double down on that. And you have to prove your value and keep up with it, And I think also understand, or try to understand, the generational buying trends of how they're going to get in contact with you. And are you capable of handling that now? And I think that's important because I think I always joked, when, originally I didn't like ads and, I'll call them newspapers, right? No one looks at that, when they want to go to paper. But I used to joke, we would build up a website. You go out there and I'm like, listen, people, this is pre-mobile phone days. Like, I wasn't going to invest in that really expensive website because if they were down, they couldn't find me.
Yeah.
Now we kind of looked at it has to be mobile friendly. Do people get annoyed on a text marketing piece? Am I mailing it? And you always have to be willing to try something because we've actually gone back to, postcard mailing, snail mail kind of things, different ways to communicate because now we're spammed to death, we're text to death. How else can they find you? Yeah. I just sent out, for holidays times, for the I'll call them the big three, Thanksgiving. Actually, I'll say four. We did Halloween emailing, Thanksgiving emailing, Christmas and New Year's. I had someone that answered a New Year's email, literally just said, hey, we're looking for IT. I'm like, wow. The guy was on my mailing list for 6 months, just happened to hit the right time. He liked the tone of the email, closed them in 6 days. It was just, it never happened to me before. So, and it was just the general, hey, happy holidays. It wasn't anything. It was very textual. It wasn't a fancy pop-up card, but it got through to them. And I think that we have to look at these different techniques and not be scared of trying it.
What made you decide to triple down on marketing?
I figured that when I looked at that, there was a big demand every time we ran. So during COVID, every time we ran these workshops, we were like fully, and back then we used a third-party company to help us with these, and these were hand-on workshops. I was like, wow, people are looking for people that A, are still in business, and B, could provide the level of support even though the world was coming to an end. And that's where I figured I had to go out there and these people had to find us. So I think it was important. And then right after, where we were marginal, maybe second vaccine world, where some people were going back, now they had to convert what they carried home back to the office. Or we had to go out there and, build Teams rooms, Zoom rooms. People were downsizing. And I knew that they needed IT help. Maybe they didn't have a good, remote workforce experience with the current provider. But it was just a matter of, I think we got it down good. It's a good time. We all took our precautions. We all knew what we would do, and it just worked well for us.
Do you have a rule of thumb for what you think you should be investing in marketing?
It's really hard. I'm one of those that pre-pandemic, we used to do every year, twice a year, we do these really cool hockey events. We get people to come out to the arena 3-4 hours before the game. We'd have catering in there. We'd have a little event. We'd go out and we'd do this. And, vendors would look for this ROI. And I'm like, listen, some of these guys are 1 or 2 times coming back. I can't put a finger on it, but now they had a good experience. It wasn't like, hey, where's that purchase order? You just spent the afternoon with me. It was content focused. So I kind of look at it differently. I'll look on an overall ROI, and maybe I might even go 18 months out because someone might come because it's a great venue. That was like my key takeaway. How many, lunches at the hotels can you go to? So I thought of things that would be fun things. We used to do these hockey events. When you're in a suite, it's hard to sell because people want to have a good time. So we found a way to do it pre-game. And pre-game, we'd have, the hockey team. They'd send their mascot. They'd send the radio announcer. They'd send a player. And it was kind of cool and gave us time to network with people. And I think it's important to think about what you would want at an event. We did a fun little Dave & Buster's kind of thing. I'm a big Dave & Buster's kind of guy. Come, do some stuff. Let's play some games. Let's make it fun. And I always try to think about where the venue is located. Because in Florida, one of the downsides versus New York is mass transit. And is it easy to get in and get out? Will it be fun? We're going to be doing this year, we'll probably do something like a cyber wine tasting. Make it kind of fun. We have a local high-end shooting range. It's actually in your style, from your area, but this is like a club. And we'll do something fun kind of like that that might be different to attract people. So that's why I say it might take a little time on that food chain, but I view that that's budgeted money that I put aside. And it's very hard of someone to track them if they came to one or two events during the year, but a year later they signed with me. So I think it's important to think like you would go to an event. What would be fun or different, and add to it. We did a poker tournament. We've done some fun kind of different kind of things that it was just like a half hour of talking, if that much. Here's what we're about. So we're going to do a sequence of these cyber wine tastings that I think will be kind of fun. Small group, small presentation, let people learn about wine and pairing and be kind of different and fun. And we hope that they have an experience and get a good feeling that we're that kind of company. That's my sales pitch, and that's how I kind of look at it. And we do look for, market development funds that are out there. Last year we did 8, I'll call them Microsoft Copilot type events, AI events, where, we brought them in. Yeah, there's a half hour of this stuff, but I would open up at the end of these events. I'm like, guys, all right, I've showed you enough. I'm apologizing up front because I am going live right now. I don't know what's in my mailbox. I don't know what my guys are chatting about. But if I can't show you this live on whatever public internet I am, and we did 8 of these, and people were enthused. Out of every one of those, I left plenty of times for Q&A, and we had anywhere from 10 to 35 people in a given place. And I got so many great ideas from those people that, could barely spell AI. And then they came up with like, I could automate this in my business. Is this possible? And then getting that group discussion, got a lot of business out of that. But like when you open up your box, and we all have this, it's either a customer, a friend, a client, somebody, you got like that 20 email chain, and you click in Copilot, you say, summarize this, and I don't have to read all that. Same thing with my chats or showing the stuff live, and they can feel how enthused I am with it. So it's getting them something different that they can't see elsewhere, and making them feel like their question's important, and it's important that they came.
Mm-hmm. As an MSP, how do I know if I'm underinvesting in marketing?
I think that, you look at these pieces and you kind of just say, hey, listen, here's my monthly revenue. Here's where I want to be. Where you talked about, I got to figure out that I added 2 employees today. What's that going to take? Do I need and they're engineers, hoping that I get a 5, 6, 7 time return on that at a minimum. So I think you're just looking at how you're going to get to those leads. I think peer groups are really important, because just because you and I are talking, doesn't mean someone's going to knock on the door and go join the Chamber of Commerce. I think it's important to find other people to hear what they're doing. That's why I feel it's important. I know probably 20 MSPs in my driving distance. Some of them were part of organizations, and we just hang out. So you got to see what's working. You got to go out to events. You got to listen to podcasts like this. Find out who you're talking to, because we all have a different perspective on things. So I think it's important to see what other people are doing, and then just look at some of the go to some industry events. Like I love Jay McMahon. He puts together some great statistics that are out there. Very active on social media. He'll answer your question, back it up with some data, CRN. There's a whole bunch of publications that you could just ping people, look at their statistics, see what they're, and they all run events. Channel Pro, CompTIA, everybody has a different set of metrics to go out there. And you just have to look at, how would I get from step A to step B? Oh man, I just can't raise everyone's prices 22% to make up that piece. And then what if 3 of those leave me? Or am I an MSP that I got that one giant client, and God forbid that goes like half my company? So I think you got to look at what you're going to do, and then you got to try something. You got to try small, see what you get out of it. Look at groups like Robin Robbins or some of the others that are in place there. We're a happy Robin Robbins customer that's there, and maybe I didn't agree with some things in the beginning, but I tried it. And what works for the guy in Greenville might not work for the guy in Fort Lauderdale, and what works in Fort Lauderdale might not work for the guy in Oklahoma or LA. So I think that's why it's interesting to see what works for other MSPs in other markets. And maybe you get a great idea and you just put your flair on it. But that's the way I kind of look at it. It's hard for me at our size to work off that business plan, I'm like shoot from the hip. If I see some great idea that I hear on a podcast, think about how I can do it. Can I afford to do it? Wow, what could be that return?
Mm. Now, you brought up Copilot and AI. I'm curious, what are you seeing right now? Is that actually driving business? Are you just seeing questions? Where do you think we are?
I think it's the shiny object to get people to start thinking about it. I will say that, being a Copilot user from the beginning, I'm addicted and I live by it. That's just me. We do use other tools that are in place there. We have a MSP focused AI platform that we sell to customers. And you get to the point that everyone prompts differently. And some of this is when I do my whole pitch, Microsoft has some great pieces, and I tell them, listen, I could substitute the word ChatGPT, proximity, I could Claude, I could substitute anything, all the same things. But I remember the first time I found YouTube, and I realized that when I started on Friday, that was like Sunday morning already, right? You remember that piece. And I feel like if we give large groups of people AI tools to play with, they're not as productive. They got to be trained right, and you have to have an objective to go through it. So I think things like Copilot and ChatGPT and Claude give us the ability to go out and see what could be and help automate it. So in the prompt library that we kind of sell, the platform, they look like apps, but they're pre-done applications. So, and all it is a group of prompts. So one of the things that we show all the time to our not-for-profits is it's actually an RFP or grant writer, where the workspace, the actual large language model, set up to know everything about them. And we put this little prompt piece in there where they drag in a PDF, they drop it in, they answer, it could be 5, could be 10, could be 12 questions, and then it starts generating the grant information just to show them that. There's a resume writer, hate to show that. There's a social media generator. There's a whole bunch, and all this is pre-prompting, right? So we go back from being free-formed to showing things. That's where I think the big thing is. And with Microsoft's releases back in November of Copilot agents, it shows you that you don't have to be a coder. You can have this Copilot agent of a SharePoint library. So I think that this gives us the tip of the iceberg. I think it also leads to, new generation of hardware. In past years, we used to have to fight with people to go from, Windows 7 to Windows 10 to Windows 11. Well, now, Windows 10 is sunsetting. The cyber world has changed. So without those patches, maybe it's like riding without your safety belt. Seeing these new PCs, I have a brand new Lenovo Snapdragon piece. I flew to LA, so that's 3 hours, 2 hours before the plane ride, 6 hours. I didn't charge it for a day. It has AI things built into it. So I think that we're seeing what it could do, and it's just the tip of the iceberg for people. So, and everyone's definition is different.
Yeah. What do you think the role for you and MSPs will be with AI, and kind of how that will be? And you can answer however you want, but I think what I'm asking, to be a little more specific, is, the cloud came and we're instrumental. That's, you clearly adopted cloud at some level, but will it be that, or will it be websites where most MSPs are like, well, we don't really do that. We send that off. I'm curious where you think how you'll approach.
I think it's that high level thinking and consulting of how they can put this together. Because listen, even when we started talking Copilot, I remember, I think it was last year, Martin Luther King Day. That was when Microsoft made Copilot generally available. And the only reason I know it is because I was at a hockey game with my grandkids and my phone started buzzing. Like, I need this stuff now. And luckily for us, one of our distributors had a web app. So I'm sitting there between periods ordering Copilot. But I think the thing that we realize is that as we look at that, so now I've been telling that same client for 5 years, you need better SharePoint security. So now I'm giving people the way to find the needle in the haystack. So I think that we still have to build better security practices that are out there. We have to sell them the tools, because it's not that you just throw in Copilot out to 50 people. It's that you invest in Copilot Studio to actually see what people are doing to try to give them the data quicker, and maybe some of their data. So it's no different than like when we started, on the internet. We had 20, 30 different sources of data. And how can I get the one thing? And that was, a Google search. Right? And people would have those those engines built into their own search platforms. Remember when Google came out? Google came out with these appliances that were like $20,000, $30,000, and that would index everything. So I think that we're at the stage where there's some security consulting. Since we've seen it and lived it, listen, Copilot or any of those aren't going to work. You need an Azure large language model. Programmers could use these things. So we're still the chef. It's just at a different scale. And we've partnered up with a couple of developers to kind of help us. Because in reality, if you dream it and there's not a regular tool, we're at the stage where they don't want to wait for a commercial tool to come out. They want it done. But we have seen that Copilot is integrated into a lot of things. We sell for 30 plus years. We've sold this document management product. They're in the legal space. They probably own the largest share. It's 6 months after Copilot was generally released. Now Copilot could link into their proprietary database and search documents. So I think that it's the tip of the iceberg. We have a part because what are they going to ask Copilot for the answer? I think I saw a little blurb on the news that Google had to take down some of these bot agents because the Gemini agents were giving people false information. So I think that there's still that part that if you're not giving them that customized model that will guarantee that they'll get only their data, it's almost twice the work because now they have to figure out, is it right or is it not?
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a really good take on it. So where do you think we are in the adoption curve of this? Or do you think we're in you're a sports guy, I'll do my best to make an analogy. Are we in the first inning, in the first pitch?
I think we're in the first inning. I think that there's a lot of people that have bought it, played with it. Our goal this year is to analyze all of our customers' networks, because not everybody have the tools for us to do this, to let them know that people are using free AI tools and that maybe that person isn't as smart as he or she could be. Or maybe they're taking that, customer list, feeding it up, asking them, and not realizing that becomes publicly available. I think that we are in the first inning because everyone thinks they know what they're doing because they've asked the tool. I think I've seen some of the, this week, every week in the past weeks for football, Gemini has huge amounts of ads. So it's like laying and talking to it. And I'm like, oh my God, we've had Siri, So I think that we are in the first inning. There's a lot of sophistication. And even in just the year and a half that Microsoft has Copilot, I think Microsoft has a Copilot type thing for everything that's there. And the ability to just take the Copilot engine and generate these agents. That's why I think we're at the first inning. I think there's a lot of tech. I was at one of the conferences Jay McVane put out, and his company put out that there actually won't be enough power in the world. I forget the exact statistic, but if you did a Google search and then you compared it to an AI search, whether it's ChatGPT, it uses 1,000 times more power. Just think about that. So everybody is utilizing this, but as we're getting there, there's not enough, NVIDIA in the world. There's not enough power to keep going at these data centers. So something has to change. And when they put up that statistic of power, not having that something has, we're shocked because we're just asking, Chat or Copilot or any of those, every question in the world. And they're right. It uses more CPU. It goes out there. It's just a crazy kind of thought. So that's why I think that we're there, and companies want to make their employees more efficient. They don't want them to create that PowerPoint faster. They want real answers. And even if you see some of the IBM commercials, when you're watching any sports thing for Watson looks totally different now. It's not focusing on AI, it's focusing on the encompassing thing. They're asking client questions in the commercials. They're asking for sales data. We know in IT that's like from 12 different sources.
Yeah.
That's the part that we really have to get to.
That makes a lot of sense.
It's a lot of work for all of us that are out there in all different industries that are there, but we have to get it to be more integrated.
Yeah, long road there.
It is, but it's kind of cool. It's kind of cool.
Yeah. Let me switch gears. What do you feel like's been the biggest lesson of all the years in business, Michael?
I will say that, I think it's you want to treat people right. I hate to say it, there's too many of those things. I want to be treated, I think it's important. I think I emphasize multiple times customer service. You can't take for granted that relationship. I think that's there. And then, as every year, I think we've seen it all. But, look at this past year CrowdStrike. Like, who would think?
Right.
Who would think that something can bring down Delta Airlines for a week and throw the piece into a tailspin? I'll go back to the year before. Who would think that someone like Southwest would just go into a full tailspin because all their systems don't coordinate? So I think that, we really have to we can't take any of those things for granted. And we always got to be looking at that next upgrade. And I think it's more and more important these days because we just look at, we look at Southwest. I actually went to, I forget where I was traveling. I think I was traveling to San Antonio. I was on Delta, and I flew from Fort Lauderdale to Atlanta, and then lo and behold, it wasn't easy for me to get to San Antonio, and my plane's like an hour late. Not a problem. I get on there, and then they didn't have the flight crew person, so maybe that's an hour and 15. So you're on there, and you start asking them, and the crew that was flying to Atlanta, the original plane broke, so they actually took another crew that was supposed to end up in El Paso. And I'm like, how does this work? And they just get like texts. And you start thinking of how complicated an airline system has to be. So we left an hour and 15 minutes late, but because of good winds, we were really only 15 minutes late. But then that crew that was going from DC to Atlanta, they thought they were going to El Paso, now ends up in San Antonio. I'm like, how do you guys get home? It's like, listen, we just look for those texts. It comes back. They know that I got to be home in 3 days. And, I think one of the flight crew that I was talking to was in Boston. So she was in DC. She was going to Atlanta. She thought she was going to end up in El Paso. Now she's in San Antonio. So we start looking at these intricacies, and we take for granted that, oh man, the wind's down or the systems suck. And I was actually thoroughly shocked to hear, how the inner workings. So I think more and more, that's one of the good things that we help our customers do. Understand their inner workings, because we can't be sitting 7 years and hope that you're going to get an upgrade. We want to keep those clients on that fast upgrade path, and we give them the real reasons why. If you're 6 years on that server, you're getting refurbished parts. I can't guarantee you that model's still in there. And, so I think you look at that where companies could go into those tailspins because they either were reliant on a full vendor or they just neglected to do those updates, and how we rely on everything. And if you traveled recently, you went out for holiday time, everyone's on a phone. Can't imagine if we really had to talk. Stuff was down.
Yeah. Yeah. If there was one thing you had to do differently or do over, what would that be?
I passed up on a couple of technology options that I just didn't think. I think the good thing that I did is I jumped on board with Microsoft Cloud early. I think, before Teams, we had this great opportunity to go into something called OCS. We just didn't see it. And I should have gone with my instinct. I was with another company. And, I was like, oh my God, you look at those things. And then, didn't speak up certain times when I wasn't the owner on that side of it, fostered some bad relationships from that. And I think it's always, you got to be true to yourself. You got to be able to sleep at night. And I think those were probably the decisions that I could have changed. And I should have spoke my piece or should have jumped with my instinct and go with some things. I think we all go through those things, the would have, should have, could haves.
Sure.
But I think it's important. And I think, we do have to just foster good relationships. I think that it was probably 7 years ago. It was one of my ex-engineers, his mom died, and we kept in contact. I went to the funeral, and I look in the back, and I'm like, oh my God, there's a whole bunch of people that used to work for me, or I've known them time, because he kept in contact with them. And I felt a little weird. I walked in, and they're like, hey, Mike, they want you to come and hang out. And made me feel it was bad reason to be there, but it was really kind of cool that everybody wanted to say hello. And I felt like I did something right. People leave for one reason or the other, and you always wanted to be smooth. But it's good when people, they might be all ex-employees or people just look you up you haven't seen in a long time, and they don't have to.
That's right.
And I think those are the kind of things that, it's, you gotta live for a reason, and you gotta treat people right. I think that's one of those things that, and you gotta speak up. You gotta speak up if it's against what you're thinking.
Well said. What's something that you're looking forward to right now, Mike?
Well, you know what? I am looking forward to a better year than last year. Had some, illnesses and everything on there. Had a great year last year. I joke we are the cyber provider for the Florida Panthers Hockey Club, and I look at it. We won Stanley Cup last year. It was like a great year for me. I like to spread the wealth a little, the wealth, and share a lot of different things over the next year. I think it's important to make sure that you share those good things and share some of those good things that we've discovered. I feel like, as maybe we get a little older at that point in time, there's some knowledge that we have to pass over. And I think that type of information is important to share. And, looking forward to this networking year to be able to, I got a lot to give, whether they want to hear it or not. And, it should be a very cool technology year.
What's your biggest challenge right now?
I think the biggest challenge is really staffing. I think it's, staffing and work ethic. I remember that my first job out of school, I worked for a financial services company. I lived in Queens. I'd have like an hour and a half subway commute. Went across Jamaica Bay, went through old Brooklyn, eventually. And I remember that, you go in there, and I was late 2 days in a row. Snowy, kind of rainy days. And then I came in late the second day, and my boss said to me, he goes, "Listen, I don't want to hear it." He goes, "You come in after 8:30 another day, just don't come to work at all." And I think, some of those things, you build into those things and you start reminiscing on that stuff. So now I realize why I'm always early for something. If I have to be someplace, and I think, those are the little things that we have to pass down. And I think I joked about it before. Listen, you got a problem, let us know in advance. You're stuck in traffic, let us know. I don't have to sit there wondering, where's Joe? Why is the client calling me? So I think those communication skills and the work ethic, and feeling like I'm not just a job, as we do our meetings, I usually sit sales on one side, tech on the other side. And I say, it sounds kind of corny. You hear me say it because my two boys work for me. We are truly like a family, because listen, if sales isn't selling, how am I going to keep the engineers going? If the engineers aren't doing a good job, what are the sales guys going to do? I think passing on those ethics and letting them understand that, we all do need each other, and it's not just getting a paycheck. And I think those are the things that you want people like that, not just, "Hey, sorry, I've worked here for 2 weeks. It's not for me." I'm like, really? I just put in a training. I always do say that my door is open. If there's a problem, speak about it. And that's just not what I'm seeing today out in the workforce. You want people that want to feel like part of something that's there, and speak up if there's something that's wrong. I think that's a key thing. We do go out and do a lot of public speaking, and we are, working with, Broward County Public Schools in various areas to talk about, businesses. I'm always a speaker out there looking to give my wisdom, in that I speak at local colleges of, how I got to where I be. I climbed my way all the way up. No one gave me anything. So I think that my next year I want to give more of those and spend more time out there. And I don't want to call it public speaking. We're involved in a lot of different organizations, and I volunteer. If there's a business class and they want to talk IT, or if they want to talk about entrepreneurship or how I got here, just like we're doing, that's what I really look forward to this year. I have a pretty big calendar of that, a lot of hopeful takers that are out there, and I feel good when we can pass on what worked for me. Maybe you'll find one little tidbit.
Make sure to take Michael up on that. One last question at a high level. What is there a book you would recommend? A number one book you'd recommend?
So it's funny. I get asked that a lot. I am a huge spy. I don't have a book, but I just love fallen out of time and reading, authors like Clive Cussler. You look at those. I read all the Patterson books. I'm not a big business book kind of person because I can sit down and read something over this past weekend, David Balducci. What I love in these new spy stories that are out there and the things, they're talking about tech. They're talking about how they're hacking. They're talking about crazy drones. They're talking about, high-tech boats and tech. And then you Google it and it's there. So I just like falling out of time going through these kind of things because it's just a great use of my time. I watch so many podcasts. I hear so many great speakers over the year. For my reading time, I just love, falling in place. And I use a guy, if no one's ever read it, Clive Cussler. His most famous book was Raise the Titanic. And what he does in every one of his books is he starts off with something that happened in history. In that book, it was the Titanic sinking. But in the end, he dreamed up this piece that there was something inside the Titanic that would save the world in this story. So he ties a lot of past stuff. And every one of those books, I have that same excitement. All right. What's the plot here? It takes me like 100 pages to say, why did I just read about these Mayans? But there's something historical that he ties some fiction to that eventually comes back to today's times with his cool characters. And that for me is just, I can, like I said, if I had that, I'd read cover to cover.
Yeah.
I'm not a big business book person, but I just love these kind of stories that are out there. And I follow these authors all the time.
So Raising the Titanic.
Clive Cussler, you take a look at any of his books that are out there, they're really kind of cool. And he developed characters over time. So there's a couple different set of series. But like I said, historical, you're like, what the heck's going on? Ties it together with his cool character. There's always a woman in it. There's always the hero in it. And in the end, there's some tech that they're looking. It's just a cool set of stories.
That sounds really cool. Michael, how can folks listening find you, connect with you?
So I am on LinkedIn. I'm Michael A. Goldstein because there's a few Michael Goldsteins that are out there. LANinfotech.com. Of course, all the other platforms that are in place there, but I'm really big on posting industry type information up on LinkedIn. I put some personal stuff out there. This weekend, I actually got to see, I am about 3.5 hours from Cape Canaveral. So I follow SpaceX launches, and from my front of my house, I can actually see the trail of, some of those SpaceX launches. So I post some cool stuff up there, but not out there selling on LinkedIn. I just like to put some good content in place there to help out the community.
That's really cool. Well, Michael, this has been an amazing gift. Don't miss the gift Michael gave you. Reach out to him. And thank you so much for your gift and your presence and being on MSP Mindset.